of the coolest parts of the Scarlet and Violet era is hands down the affordability. Whether that's illustration rares, special illustration rares, or hyper rare trainer cards, every set has delivered us some pretty phenomenal artworks at some awesome prices. And with the success of 151 and the recent announcement of Prismatic Evolutions, Pokemon has positioned themselves perfectly for another market boom. Now granted, a lot of the most sought after artworks in the Scarlet and Violet era do cost a pretty penny.
You can donate 1 penny to me.
Which is why it would behoove you to remember just how many artworks the Scarlet and Violet era has given us and just how much money these artworks can make you. So today I want to discuss my top 5 illustration rares you should consider buying. The first card I want to talk about is the Gloom illustration rare from Obsidian Flames. Now Obsidian Flames isn't one of the greatest Scarlet and Violet sets of all time. As a matter of fact, if I were to rank them all right now, Obsidian Flames would probably be in my bottom 2. However, I think this card deserves to be highlighted because with a market price of $7.54, this is one of the more expensive illustration rares from the set. And as far as artworks go, I think they absolutely crushed it with this Gloom. I think it is very appropriate for the type of Pokemon that Gloom is. I want to believe that this is the best trip of Gloom's life and all of this stuff is in its head. So I have to give this a solid 9 out of 10. But what's even better than that is this card in a PSA 10 goes for roughly $120. And if we take a look at its graph, there's been a lot of growth for this card lately, and that could reflect in the PSA 10 prices in the near future. So after buying, grading, and fees, you're looking at a potential upside of $80 on a $7 card. Next up is another card from Obsidian Flames that I feel like has been undervalued and underappreciated for far too long, and that's the Caesar illustration rare. Now, over the course of the history of the TCG, Caesar has had some of the most incredible artworks, but when it finally gets an illustration rare, it flies entirely below the radar. I love the background, and I love how they have it postured because it looks like it's bracing some very perilous winds or getting ready for an attack, but whatever it is, it's a really cool artwork. I've got to give this card a 9 out of 10, and with a current market price of $5.53, I probably should give it a 10 out of 10. And there are some people out there that have recognized how awesome of an artwork this is because you can see it in its PSA 10 numbers. On average, in a PSA 10, this card sells for about $130. So not only does it have a lower market price than the Gloom previously, but it also sells for more in a PSA 10. Now granted, its chart doesn't show as much positive growth as Gloom, but I think it is very deserving of the number 4 spot. Coming up in the 3 spot, we have what I would deem Pokemon's most accurate depiction of a toddler and the aftermath of an average temper tantrum, and that is the Riolu illustration rare from Scarlet and Violet base. When this card debuted with the very first set of the Scarlet and Violet era, I was stoked, partially because I knew at some point they just had to make a Lucario special illustration rare, which we haven't seen yet. However, with the low amount of sales that the Scarlet and Violet base set has actually been doing, I think a lot of people have forgotten about this card, which is surprising because on average you can pick up this card for around $9, but its PSA 10 prices have been all over the place, so I'm just gonna say that this card sells on average for $140 in a PSA 10, which again for a card with a market price of under $10 is pretty incredible. And this is probably the first card on my list that I have to give a 10 out of 10 when it comes to the artwork because I think it perfectly encaptures Riolu. Because number one, look at how unbothered that face is. The room is a mess. It's trashed. He went hard. He caused as much havoc in that room as he possibly could, and he just doesn't care. That or he was framed and he still doesn't care, which is kind of funny either which way. But all in all, for a $9 card to potentially yield you $100 in profit, that's a no-brainer for me. Breaking into our top 2, we have another banger from Scarlet and Violet base, and that is the Slowpoke illustration rare. Now sadly, even though I do have it above the Riolu, I do not have this card as a 10 out of 10. I have it as about an 8.5, maybe a 9. I love what they did to highlight Slowpoke, you know, him being a pink Pokemon and the entire scenery being white, brown. It just makes Slowpoke stand out a hell of a lot more, which does make it funny, and having it look like it comes out of the kitchen does bring a smile to my face. However, I can't knock this card too bad because with a market price of $9.25, this card is a pretty solid steal, especially for what it sells for in a PSA 10. Last solds have this valued at $150. For a card with a market value of less than $10 to sell for $150 in a PSA 10, yeah, this has definitely earned a position on the podium. And again, it's not necessarily my favorite card of all time, but I can't say the same for our cards. Coming in at the number 1 spot is a tie with the Paldean Tauros illustration rare from Paldea Evolved and the Armarouge illustration rare from Scarlet and Violet base. Both of these cards in my mind are some of the best artworks from their respective sets, and I think their current market prices are way undervalued, especially compared to some of the other cards that we have on this list. With the Armarouge illustration rare coming in at a market price of $5.29 and the Paldean Tauros coming in at $6.76. Now, as far as their PSA 10 prices go, they are all over the board. However, recent solds have these guys priced anywhere from $165 to $200 in a PSA 10. Think about that. A potential $200 market price in a PSA 10 for a card that you got for less than $7. And both of these artworks are, without a doubt in my mind, 10 out of 10s. They are some of the most spectacular illustration rares that we have seen in the last 7 sets, a part of the Scarlet and Violet era. Both of these cards are long-term positions for me because anytime I go to a card store, if I find one in a really solid condition, I'm buying it. I truly believe these cards are undervalued and at some point probably will sell consistently for $200 in a PSA 10. All in all, I hope you guys had a good time, and I want to know your thoughts down in the comments below. Let me know, do you agree with my rankings or not? Take care.